Hi, welcome back. Um, in this session, I want to talk about making Qt call your Python code so that when you build an interface, you will actually have a functionality behind the interface so that your interface really becomes a tool that does the thing that you need it to do without running Python from the command line anymore, but by actually clicking some buttons. So with that said, let's just dive right into it. I'm going to do this in Maya because it allows me to not only call some print functions, but also create some 3D objects, which I think is extra fun. But if you're following along in a standalone Python interpreter, you can do all of this outside of Maya by just installing Qt and setting up a Q application. I've shown this in the past two videos and I will not go over it again because I hope you will have an example from those videos and just write that down somewhere so you have a template to start from in the future. First thing we want to do is import all of our Qt libraries again. And I'm going to use PySide2, but you can use PySide1, PyQt, PyQt4, whichever you have installed. This one just comes with Maya, so it's easy. If you're a Maya user, no installation necessary. This is just inside the program. Next, I'm going to make a main window. I'm going to show that main window. That's kind of the core of my application. Now I'm going to build a quick layout. And the idea I have is that I'm going to have a line edit where you can type something and a button, and then it copies the line edit text to a label. So I'm going to have 3 widgets in a horizontal layout. But first we need a central widget for the main window. So there's a Q widget and a QH box layout. And I'm going to add these to the respective parent objects as fast as I can. So I create a central widget and I add it, and I create a horizontal layout and I add it. Now I don't have to think about the central widget ever again because it's just, I'm done with that. It has the layout, it's been added to the window. I don't need to interact with it anymore. Next, I'm going to add my widgets to the horizontal layout. That's going to be add widget, and I'm going to create 3 widgets. So first there will be a label. Actually, I said that wrong. First there will be a line edit. Then there will be a button. And then there will be a label. And I'm going to add them in that order. And the button could use some text, so copy me. And the line edit, we could set some default text to instruct the user what to do, or we could add a label in front of it or above it. But what the line edit can actually do is it has placeholder text. And that's a really cool feature because it shows you a piece of text without it actually being part of the value. So you don't have to delete it when you start editing. It's just a hint for you like what to fill into this empty text field. I think this will be about the widget that I want. All right, so here you can see that copy button. You can see that there's no data yet in my label. And you can see that here it says write what to copy. And my label is just empty. There's nothing to select here. And as soon as I start typing, that disappears. And as soon as I go back to empty, it reappears. It's a great way to instruct your user what a field is for. And you'll often see something like search ... or, there's just these little hints that you can sprinkle around your interface. All right, so this is kind of what we went over in the last session, and now we really need to talk about the functionality behind it. So all of these variables that we've created are now pointing to these different Qt objects, and they all have interesting functions that we can reason about. For example, the line edit actually has text, and so does the label. So you could say print line edit.text, which I think is empty now because, of course, I didn't write anything. So let's write test and then print that text, and it actually outputs test right here. So that's Yeah, again, all of this stuff you can find in the documentation, but yeah, the naming is pretty consistent. So labels will have text, line edits will have text. Numeric values have or numeric edits have values. So you have a spin box for numbers, and that will have a value, and it will have a set value, and the line edit will have a set text. That's always like the really nice flow where they have a set and then the normal function that doesn't have the word set in front of it. So I think I can actually get the placeholder text like this as well. And it just has a pretty consistent way of writing these things. So once you know about a feature that exists, it's very easy to think about like how do I get and how do I set that value. So yeah, let's make that copy function. And what we're gonna do here is we get the line edit.text. That's the text to copy, and then we say label.setText, and that's the text that we have copied. So we can add that function at the end here and actually run it. First need to make that function happen. Now it has actually copied our value. Sorry, I still haven't parented the widget to Maya properly. Let me do this. You can see the window here. So I can write something here, and copy doesn't do anything yet, but I do have the functionality coded out here. So my code is very separate from my UI, except it needs those global variables to exist, to know about what UI element it's talking to. And then we're getting into something called signals and slots. If you've coded before, you might know these as events, or if you went to school, you might know this as the observer pattern. But in Qt, they're called signals and slots. And a signal is something that Qt will emit. So when something happens, Qt will broadcast like, hey, this has happened. It will broadcast a signal saying this button has been clicked or text in this field has been changed. And you can listen to these signals by adding a slot. So you connect the signal to the slot, and then the signal will call the function, because a slot is just another word for a function in this case. And it will call that function with some useful information about what happened. So if you say, I want to listen to the text change of this field, the slot has to or will receive the new text value. So after the change, Qt will signal, hey, this is the new text to anybody that is listening, to any slots that are connected. But we're gonna listen to the clicked action, and that doesn't have any extra information. So it's a little bit more basic to start out with. So at the end of building my whole window, I usually structure my code like this. I have my logic, I have my right creation, show the UI, that's all the way at the end. And then in the middle, I have the connect, logic, and UI. And that's just a list of connections that I'm going to make. These are not necessarily always in the same order, but yeah, it's just nice to group your code in these different sections. Or at least I find it very nice, because when I'm playing with the layout, I don't want to make changes to any of these sections. They're just very different topics that I'm dealing with. So if I have a bug, I'm looking at the logic. But if I'm adding a button, then I can go first add it to the layout, then write the logic, then connect it. You know, it's a really nice structured way of working. But that's something you have to figure out for yourself, because I imagine anyone that uses Qt will do this in their own way. There are just many approaches to the same problem as is with code in any case. So the button has a clicked, and let's print what that is. So again, in Python, you can just print whatever. And here it says it's a signal instance. So clicked is a signal, and we can listen to that signal by connecting to it. So we have clicked.connect, and that's a function. And connect just expects us to give the name of a function. So when I'm connecting, I'm gonna give it this function name. And now it's like it's a variable name, right? So I can print the copy fn, and that's a function. So I can give a function to connect. I'm not calling the function, right? I'm not doing these brackets. I'm just naming the function. And now connect will remember that name. Whenever clicked happens, when that signal gets emitted, it will call this name. And then we'll end up over here. So let's rerun all of this. So we get a clean slate window. No data yet. If I click copy, it should copy empty. So that has disappeared. But now we write test and it will copy test. We write hello world. And this is our hello world Qt application. It's yeah, it goes from A to Z, just building the widget and implementing the logic and connecting the logic to the UI. This is basically how you do absolutely anything in Qt. So I'll do one more nice addition here where I will say the line edit has an editing finished feature. So it's not while you're typing, but it's like when you click on something else or when you press tab to leave the widget and focus on the next one. Or when you press enter, like you submit the data to the line edit. These are like common UI things that you can see in like in your operating system in any software that you use, right? So if I go to Maya, I can press tab to move around these inputs. But when this happens, if I make a change here, make this 40, and now I press tab, that's when it sets the 40, and that's the editing finished. Is because I leave the widget and I've changed the data. So I was like, oh, you edited the data, you're leaving, editing finished. And you can see Maya is listening to that and changing the scene if I do it here. And now we're going to listen to that and we're also going to copy if we do it in our window. And I think this will break because now this will editing finished and it will send the text. Ah, no, it didn't break. That's pretty nice. So you can also get the arguments here. Let's try that out real quick. Oh, there's an empty version of that. That's kind of cool. Let's see. Maybe I just misremember. Editing finished. To line edit. Ah, no, it doesn't send any extra info. I wanted to show sending extra info. So now we're going to look at text edited because that has some extra info. Text edited dot connect copy fn. All right, let's try this one. It's less useful because it keeps changing. I mean, I guess when you're writing a color picker or a slider, it's actually really nice that this kind of feature exists as well because you can have live feedback. But with text, it's usually less common to just react to it as you're typing. But in any event, what you can see printing here is that the text change is actually sending data to the copy function. So this text edited signal will actually emit not just by calling the function, but will also emit some data. And in this case, we're using the args. We're just getting the text that was in the line edit. But we could also just write two of them, where there's one is for the button and one is for the edit. And this one expects the text to be given by the edit. And then this one doesn't have any argument. So we get the text from the line edit directly over here. But in this version, we are already receiving the text from Qt and we are just sending it. And then we can connect up the correct function to the correct widget. And you'll see that as we're typing, this is just sending over. And this won't do anything anymore because as soon as we edit, it's already up to date. Wonder if there's ways to trick it. I guess not. Like copy paste or something is also it counts as editing the text, which is convenient because you don't want like edge cases like that making your code more complicated. That's that's the gist of signals and really the power of Qt. Though it's also kind of the weakness because when there's a bug somewhere in a signal, it can be very hard to track down how did this happen. If this one, let's say this one, we forget the argument, right? It's gonna try and send text to this function, and then this function doesn't accept any text input. So now when I do this, oh, it's still working. It's more robust than I remember, which is a good thing. It's I'll just throw an exception myself. There we go. And then I think I have to, so if you have stack trace on, normally you see where did this happen, where did it come from. But in this case, Qt is calling our function and our function is throwing an error. And we're not really sure how we got here. So if some data is wrong in the memory, or some variable is not what we expect it to be, or some value is not being given to our function in the way that we expect it to, that way, yeah, right now we don't really have that contextual information. So it can be a little bit more difficult to find out how we got to this point where something went wrong, which is also why it's important to me to separate logic um, from UI creation and from connecting. So it's a little bit easier to see if something went wrong here already. And what's more is that this logic is actually aware of the UI elements. And in bigger applications, I make an even stronger distinction where there is UI logic and core logic. And so the copy function, well, in this case, we're really getting and setting from one widget to another. But well, let's do something in Maya. Let's say create cube. I just have a cube function that I'm going to call. And then my button, I'm just going to repurpose this button to create a cube. My button is going to call create cube UI. And then that one is going to get the text, for example, and then it's going to give that as the name. That might be a nice solution, right? So we create the cube with the button. So we need to get the text from the UI. So this is UI logic. It requires the UI to get the text. Then it will call the create cube function and give it the name. So we go from a place where we know about UI to a place where we don't know about UI. Need to import CMDS. Sorry, a little bit scatterbrained today, but we will see that this should create a cube named test 1 2. Put some underscores in there. So this is allowing us to write something, and then it's allowing us to click on something. And the logic behind the button is first aware of the interface, and then it's not. And what's nice about that is now I've created a function, and this is a very simple function, but very complex logic could live here. And other tools can make use of this logic without the UI being a factor in there. So what you see a lot in, for example, in Maya, if you want to do new scene, you get this pop-up. What if I want to do new scene without the pop-up? Is this logic separated into a new scene function and a new scene with UI function or not? And some cases it is, some cases it's not. And I think it's very important to make that distinction, because that way all your code becomes reusable. Any new feature you build can dive into existing code and tap into that functionality without having to hack around UI like error messages or question dialogues or anything. So this logic would be in a file that doesn't even import Qt, just so we're 100% sure it cannot possibly do any UI logic. It's that's a technique I use to keep my code very clean. It makes it easier to debug. It makes it easier to reuse. Of course, in this small scenario, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's really something I've started doing religiously the past few years, and it's really paid off in my day-to-day programming for sure. So I hope you enjoyed that Hello World functional Qt window. We had a tool that creates a cube with a name. How awesome is that? Right. Thanks for being here, and I hope you catch the next video.